When I was seeing someone in the summer of 2014, this occurred to us. My partner and I were planning a camping vacation in South Carolina when it all happened. We had originally planned to visit a location 45 miles from our home, but they would charge us twice as much as we had anticipated. We made up our minds to go back, and I remembered there was a place not far from our house. The location is more of an off-grid position, I'll admit, but we could just park the car and walk out without paying a dime. Not only is the location breathtaking, but it also boasts a historic trail and bridge and some of the South's oldest railroad tracks. We arrived well in advance of sundown, giving us ample time to pitch the tent and prepare all of our gear. We noticed a handful of automobiles upon our arrival, but it was probably just hikers. By the time night fell, they would have disappeared. An old white van that was rusted and broken up and didn't have a license plate was the only thing that made us feel uneasy. We both thought it was strange and pointed it out, but we ignored it and continued walking to a nice spot to pitch our tent. After being out in nature for a while, we returned to the tent for some much-needed R&R. But at about 3 in the morning, we were roused from our slumber. Some distant singing and walking became audible to us. Nothing positive can come out of hearing a noise at that hour of the morning. To get a better look at what was happening, I stuck my head out the tent. We were both terrified, and even though I didn't see anything, I still didn't want to remain in that place. We thought we heard the song become louder as we hushedly gathered our possessions. I can still hear the singer's raspy laugh after saying, "Now won't you all come out?" and other lyrics from the song. The sound of leaves crunching and a buzzing let us know that this man was drawing close as we finished setting up the tent. The tent and folding chairs were tossed upon my back as I seized my girlfriend's hand to avoid the source of the noise. We ran in the opposite direction. We camped near the parking lot, which was a blessing because I could make out lights through the trees. As we ducked and dove to escape our pursuers, we became horrified to see that the lights emanating from the parking lot were not only the street lights, but also, to our horror, the headlights of the dilapidated white van we had seen when we had arrived. Right in front of my car was this person, and we hurried uphill, hoping he was alone. Another someone to deal with would be an accomplice, if he had one. Nearing the parking lot, we were illuminated by the lamps and were almost at our vehicle. The sound of the gravel was growing louder as this man approached. I overheard him asking, "Don't you all think you'll get away?" As this was going on, I gave her the key as we passed the van so she could start the car and load all our gear into the trunk, and we were able to escape that way. As the man's noises grew louder and closer, I hastily stowed the camping stuff in the back seat and sat in the driver's seat. I kept my head down and put the car in reverse while it was running, but my curiosity got the best of me. I hung around until the guy who had been trailing us came out of the woods and into the parking lot. We could make out this enormous man with a furrowed brow and reddish-brown hair in the light of my headlights. A goatee covered in grime and filth adorned his beard. Like a magnifying glass focused on 2 10-point bills, his gaze was locked upon us. While frantically swinging a baseball bat, he growled, "Come back here." As soon as I shook my head, I swerved to avoid it, and we continued on our journey out. Looking back, we could see the man's irate slam on the bat. I've never been happier that I went with my gut when I felt the need to leave the area as soon as I heard distant singing. We spent the remainder of the early morning at a Waffle House after driving there. I spent 3 nights in the great outdoors in northeast Ohio by myself. During the first 2 nights, I had leisurely enjoyed the serenity, the open sky, and the absence of any disturbances. On the third and last night, though, I narrowly escaped something terrible, possibly attempted murder. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of my hammock and walked the short distance to the bathroom because I heard nature calling to me. In the dark, I could make out the glow of a headlight a good 80 to 100 feet distant as I stood there. For approximately 10 minutes, I just stood there, trying to figure out what was going on. It seemed like they were pacing in place as they would get up, sit down, and then get up and down again. Something didn't feel right. My gut told me that I put on my boots, reached for my hatchet as a weapon, and began to sneak across my campsite, making my way to the right. This man's intentions were a mystery to me, but I was determined to uncover them. I had gone around 50 feet from my campground when I saw a second headlamp. This one, situated 40 feet distant, also swaying like the first. All the coincidences were just too much. In the dead of night, too, individuals are seen ambling through the forest close to a campground. Things weren't like this. In an effort to blend in, I knelt down and covered myself in leaves. The second man approached me within 10 feet while I laid on the ground. Clearly, he paid me no mind whatsoever. After lighting a cigarette and taking a puff, he produced a beer. After he finished, he threw the can to the ground and continued walking in the other direction. When he was a safe distance away, I stood up and chose to return to the first man. I approached him to the point where I could make out the ringing of his phone as it retrieved texts. I sneaked up on it till I could see the screen light up for each alert. At that moment, he got to his feet and began making his way to my hammock. Once again I froze and lied on the ground, attempting to maintain complete stillness. I hung around praying he wouldn't notice me. After what felt like an eternity, I began to stealthily make my way back to my tent, determined to pursue the man. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear the tarp being ripped and trashed over my hammock. In the pitch blackness, flashlights blinked, and eventually my own large flashlight, which had been resting next my hammock, began to cycle on and off. Someone threw my mess kit to the floor, and then I heard voices. According to one of them, he was just here. I held my breath and remained motionless until they departed. They eventually retreated, and I watched as the faint light from my flashlight, which they had taken, came to a steadily increasing distance. I got to my feet and began to make my way back to my spot. As soon as I was certain they had left, I couldn't believe what I saw when I returned. The tarp and hammock I was using looked like they had been machete-hacked. Under the weight of someone's foot, my mess kit was smashed, my flashlight, raincoat and backpack were stolen. Not knowing what to do, I was in a state of shock. On foot, I returned to the location where the first man had been. Along with 8 empty beer cans and a discarded lighter, I discovered a handful of chew pouches. After that, I returned to the spot where the second man had been. Worst of all, I discovered a mound of excrement without any toilet paper. Nearby, a bag of powder that turned out to be meth and a stack of cigarette butts. In that instant, I understood how fortunate I had been to escape from that place unscathed. Without turning back, I gathered up what little belongings I had and fled the encampment. If those guys were high enough to go around a campsite attempting to murder someone, I would say they were quite hazardous. Perhaps they tore my tent to shreds because they were enraged that they couldn't steal the money and cards that were in my pocket since I had already departed. However, from now on, I will not be camping in that vicinity. Camping is something that my best friend and I aim to do annually. At the age of 13, we began doing this. It wasn't until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains that I experienced genuine fear or anything out of the ordinary. We arrived on the first night during peak season, and there was a severe lack of space. We pitched our tent on the cliff face of a mountain that provided a perfect wind tunnel because the light was fading. We headed into town as soon as it was light, drank some beer, and chilled out till the late afternoon. Once we returned to the mountains to relocate our campsite, the light was fading once more. Fortunately, we discovered a secluded area shielded from the wind. We recommenced our drinking after erecting our tents and lighting the fire. Things moved at a breakneck pace, and we were startled to see a spotlight pointed at us before it swung around and began to follow us around at around 1 in the morning. Who else would walk up to you in a remote region of the mountains at 1 a.m.? We didn't give it much thought and concluded it was probably a park warden trying to get under our skin about something. While I can't speak for anyone else, I've noticed that unless there's an absolute necessity, it's generally considered rude to approach a campsite at that hour of the night. This has been my experience ever since I began camping. Regardless, as the observer drew near enough, we discerned that it constituted merely a man in his mid-50s, garbed in a shirt and basketball shorts, and his wife, a woman in her 40s, who adamantly refrained from making eye contact with us. In the midst of our conversation, the man abruptly started talking about nothing, ignored the time or his girlfriend, and kept looking away. For example, he gushed over the wonderful lantern we had and made inane comments about its model or style. Totally unrelated to the conversation he had started with us, he was also waxing poetic about his time as a police officer. In the middle of our chat, he suddenly acted as if he were going to shine his flashlight on our tents and announced, "Oh, so that's where you guys are sleeping, huh?" That is a very impressive setup. We could tell he was counting us and checking our belongings by the way his eyes and spotlight were darting around. He looked all around us with his lights and eyes. I have no idea why, but this person was assessing us. He hesitated for a second after taking in everything around him, then ended the talk and went off into the woods with his girlfriend. After his flashlight went out, my companion and I exchanged looks, and my friend silently agreed that we needed to get out of there, so we did. When I was camping, this was the most disturbing incident that has ever happened to me. I had the impression that he intended to return after we were asleep, although I'm not sure why. There was no doubt in my mind that that night we were being assessed. No big deal, right? Well, until you've ever been in a situation where another person was assessing you, you wouldn't understand. You can't fathom the terror of such an encounter until you've gone camping. For what seemed like an eternity, in 2016, my camping companions and I finally got around to going to our favorite spot in Southern California's Los Padres National Park. We scheduled the trip once we discovered a weekend that worked for everyone's schedules. We learned that a rainstorm was due to arrive 3 days before our vacation. Because we're the kind of guys that wouldn't back down from a challenge, we bundled up and drove the 45 minutes to the campsite anyhow. There were roughly 100 camping spots that encircled the forest clearing at this family-friendly campground. In addition to the fact that the nearest facilities were just 30 yards away, our chosen location was ideal because it was under large, dense trees which would act as a natural rain shelter. Since the sky was temporarily clear in the afternoon, we wasted no time getting set up as soon as we arrived at our location. Our tent layout consisted of pitching them close together with only 6 feet separating each tent door. We did this because we wanted to avoid getting wet. I brought a blue canopy tarp that was 30 feet by 30 feet thick, which I threw over to protect us from the rain that was going to fall from the sky and land on the ground. The wet weekend was made ideal, but the plastic tarp made a deafening crunch every time you walked around the tent. As time went on, we gathered around the campfire. The first time I realized that there were hardly any other campers, mostly folks camping in their RVs, was late in the evening. They possessed superior intelligence compared to my companions and I, who endured the elements in a pair of cramped tents shielded only by a blue tarp. My pals joined me in taking a nap because we were all exhausted from a hard day at the office. Adam and Seth each had their own tent, while my friend Ray slept in mine. That was the sleeping arrangement. I muttered to Ray before I turned in for the night that I was going to play a practical joke on Seth and Adam by calling them, but I wouldn't reveal anything. As I called my pals, Ray grinned. Through a limited number, I contacted them. As they disregarded our summons, Ray and I suppressed our amusement. "Just for kicks, I'm going to do it again." Seth greeted them nervously over the phone when they finally answered this time. In an effort to maintain complete silence and avoid giving the impression that it was just the two of us, Ray and I suppressed our laughs. I started breathing heavily in a murderous manner while holding the phone to my mouth. It was entertaining to hear them stress out to the point that I ended the call. Ray eventually caved and told them it was us when they kept asking if it was us. I was out in a flash because I had no trouble falling asleep, but Ray, Adam, and Seth stayed awake for a bit longer after we all stopped laughing. I got up before my buddies did, and I had breakfast on the stove before they even got out of bed. My buddies awoke one by one when they smelled my food and emerged from their tents. "Hey, the prank you two pulled last night went a little too far," Adam said while we were eating. They continued by saying that prank calling was one thing, but Going around their tent and going inside in the middle of the night was completely forbidden. I was really confused by their conversation until I finally got the whole story after a lot of back and forth asking questions and insisting that no further practical jokes had been pulled last night. To elaborate, Ray, Seth and Adam were still up for about an hour after I went to sleep. Prior to the sound of footfall on our blue tarp, the forest was silent. My companions originally speculated that it might have been an intrepid forest creature, but the sound of its heavy hooves proved them wrong. The individual had been repeatedly making figure eights as they walked around our tents. Additionally, they would run their fingers up and down the tent fabrics. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound of approaching footfall ceased just outside our tent doors. All three of them were already experiencing palpitations. There was an extended period of silence before someone slid open the tent's zipper. The tent door was somewhat ajar, as Adam mentioned, but visibility was severely impaired due to the darkness. However, in the midst of the shadows, Seth and Adam caught sight of a man's head poking out of the tent, meeting their gaze. While they pretended to be asleep, Adam and Seth couldn't tear their gaze away from the stranger. Standing at the entrance, the man proceeded to open the tent entirely and step inside. As they lay in their sleeping bags, the man observed them without speaking or taking any action. The man had just emerged from the tent after what seemed like an eternity, and the sound of his footsteps fading into the darkness signaled his departure. During the entire time this was going on, Adam and Seth believed that Ray or I was pulling a prank on them, while Ray believed that Adam or Seth were behind it. Now that we're back to bickering over breakfast, a man on his way to our campsite stopped what we were doing and asked, "Good morning, boys. How did the four of you sleep last night?" Wearing a soiled, sweat-stained white t-shirt and seemingly never-washed blue denim, this man spoke with a smoker's voice. His speech was garbled, and he had an odor of intoxicating substances. Even though we remained silent, the man approached us and asked if we might spare any cigarettes. He responded to my statement that we did not smoke by saying, "Oh well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man kept on his way to the restrooms, and as soon as he finished, he strolled back to our campground. Instead of speaking, he simply glanced at us, grinned at us with hardly little teeth, and then returned to his RV. I made mental note of his recreational vehicle, since in comparison to the others, it stood out as particularly filthy and dilapidated. In a flash, we recalled that Seth and Adam had detected the odor of alcohol emanating from the one standing outside their tent the night before, and we identified the man as the one who had been loitering around our tents. Everyone here promised to keep a closer check on this man. If he stayed another night, we'd definitely let the park rangers know about his exploits. Around midday, the man returned not to use the restroom, but to converse with us. "Is anybody here interested in purchasing a recreational vehicle?" He posed the question to kick off the discussion. "Anyone can go look at it at this very... Now get a better look at it inside to decide whether it's something you fancy buying." We assured him that we were fine, and this time around, when we spoke to him, we were all really direct and harsh. As soon as the man saw this, he turned and left. Although he did go a few hours before sunset, the man seemed to spend the whole time staring at us. About 50 yards away from us was the man's recreational vehicle, and I noted that he had a bathroom conveniently located next to it. He obviously didn't feel like making the effort to use our restroom at our campsite, so why did he, if RVs already have facilities built in, then why did he go to the trouble of using them? Whatever the man's intentions were, we were simply relieved that he departed, so we could continue our weekend without him interfering. I will never forget the most terrible night of my life, which occurred 4 years ago while camping. This occurred while my partner and I were still in the early stages of our relationship. A snorkeling excursion was something my sister suggested as a nice activity for us to do together. The diving and pristine water are what bring people to this quarry, which is encircled by a water-filled campground. Divers supposedly go below to observe a school bus and a helicopter. For our overnight adventure, my partner and I chose to camp. So initially it was a blast. Even though the depth of the water was a little alarming, I still had fun snorkeling in the quarry's shallow region. As soon as you swam out of the shallow section, the water abruptly fell off to a depth of 65 feet, and it became completely dark. I came to the realization that deep water is something I really dread at this point. My boyfriend and I were returning to our tent to chill down after a fantastic day. We set up tent in a meadow that was slightly below the road's elevation. Just across from us was a campsite that appeared to be occupied, but our neighbors weren't there, so we were able to pitch our tent in a forested area that our campsite extended to. It was just as the neighbors returned that we were frying hot dogs over the fire. Now that it was almost late, they promptly dozed out. 20 to 30 minutes following their return is when I would say the eerie things began. While conversing with my lover, I looked up and saw a shadowy figure peering down from the hilltop. We were unable to discern the figure's features due to the fire's shade, but we were certain that he was staring at us intently, nearly concealed by our neighbor's truck. Before he resumed his trek down the road, he had stared at us for what seemed like an eternity. Silently, we both observed him as he made his way past the trees along the roadside. I eagerly awaited his return every time I caught a glimpse of him approaching from behind a tree. Before I realized he had stopped walking, or was he still behind a tree, he walked behind 4 or 5 trees. I was petrified, trying to figure out if he had disappeared or was merely ducking behind a tree. Looking at what happened, I saw that my partner felt the same way, but he just shrugged it off and I foolishly did the same. We strolled over to the quarry instead, completely dispelling any recollection of the matter. While the sight of the stars reflected in the water was breathtaking, the thought of plunging into the deep, now completely dark water was downright terrifying. After returning to our campsite, we laid down in our tents, and I quickly started to ignore an unsettling feeling. My lover finally broke the awkward silence by asking, "Do you feel like someone is watching us?" "Why would you think that?" I asked, half joking and half seriously terrified. Standing by my car, my partner and I decided that the middle of the campground's field was the safest spot as he wanted to get out of the tent. However, I had the foolish notion that it wasn't. I reasoned that at least we'd have a good view if anybody came up to us. Here we were, smack dab in the midst of the field, when we spotted the same shadowy figure as before peering down at us. He was out and about, and we couldn't help but notice that he was heading in our direction. Like him, we veered off course. If we deviated from our original path once more, and the figure does as well, we threatened to book it to my car. He trailed behind us as we made another U-turn, and we made quick work of getting to the automobile. From where I sat, I observed as they cautiously retreated into the shadows, continuing to stare at us. Our camping stuff was still outside when we decided to leave for the night. We collected ourselves in a low-key manner, being careful not to frighten one another, but we were on high alert. When I informed my dad what happened the following day, he expressed relief that we escaped alive because we might have been murdered had we stayed. We returned home at about 1 a.m. It wasn't until I got back that I learned 2 individuals had drowned in that campground while swimming. Who knows what happened to them? Maybe it was swimming in the quarry at night, but my boyfriend and I suspect the person had malicious intent and may have tried to harm us. It was obvious that they had been following us throughout the night. If their goal had been to steal something, they would have done it while we were walking to the quarry at night.